Hi girls, happy March. This month we have something new, some new things in CSS, especially since CSS was ignored a little bit last month and it was probably a little bit upset about that. And then as promised, we have some new HTML form elements to talk about, a little bit of an understanding and implementation in terms of examples of using them in JavaScript, but also you'll be able to see that they're very similar to things you've used in the past. So hopefully you'll be able to integrate them into your existing projects if you want and come up with interesting ways to use them. So first, let's talk about this first section, which is our new CSS, gradients and animations. You may recall, depending on which of the sessions you have been coming to, at a couple different points so far this year, we've had either people who were repeats through the program or people who found this on their own come up with these rainbow backgrounds that change from one color of the rainbow all the way to the other across the back. This is exactly how to do that, including how to customize it to not just make it red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, but also that you can use your HTML color codes to make more custom color mixes. So the example that I'm using for all of these gradients and animations, as well as the example I'm using for the form elements and the JavaScript, is a return to our Women in Computer Science segment, though this one is even more recent than Grace Hopper was by quite a bit. This is Katie Bauman. She was a computer scientist at MIT and then at Harvard that was involved in creating the first image of a black hole. This was in 2019, near the end of 2019, I believe. And she is very interesting. She's 30 years old now, 31. She was 29 at the time, as you can see in this video. So I created this page so that we could talk a little bit about her in our virtual sessions. She's very, very interesting. And we will also watch part of this video. And then I've included her as my inspiration for the questions and things in JavaScript and our HTML elements. So you can see in here that we have a background that goes from 6 zeros, which is black, through to a middle color purple that you can see right about at the center point. And then all the way over on the right side, you can see this color here. So the gradient will sort of walk itself to come up with these nice little ways that it transitions all the way across. You can see some of my animations happening at the same time. It's difficult to display this one by one. But for this, all you need to do is make sure that you can use an existing project that you already have. If you want, as always, you can always start another one, especially if you're looking to make an interest-based one like mine. You just have to make sure you have the HTML start and end and the body start and end, because we're actually going to apply this on the body. Real quick here. So we will have, in our CSS, we say the body element, the background attribute, and then we are going to create a linear gradient. We have to give it a direction to right, to left, to top, to bottom. And then you just set your whole list of colors. You can set as many as you want. If you set 7 rainbow colors, obviously you're only going to have, instead of having this transition from 1 to 2 to 3, you're going to have 7 transitions in between all those colors. But it's totally up to you. And then you also would do the same thing if you were looking to use just a few colors. So play around with any colors you think would look good together and see what is the most striking to include. After that, we move into another animation type, which is called color changing. So this would be, you could do it on an entire body element. I probably wouldn't, because I feel like that would be a lot. But in this case, I'm doing it on a div element in the example. And what you have to do is basically specify what the animation itself should do in your CSS section. And then also in CSS, where you're already giving information about the styles of that element. So in this case, we're giving the div a width and a height, and we're telling it to put the text aligned into the center of it. giving it a starting background color. Then we have this animation, which has to specify it's a keyframes animation. It's just the way CSS identifies this. We give it a name, a descriptive one if at all possible. So I'm calling mine color change because that's exactly what it does. And then you just have to specify a from and a to, which means this is what it should start looking like. This is where it should end up. So I want to go from a background color of red to a background color of yellow. In my case, in here, in order to make this not quite so jarring, I changed it from black to the middle purple color so that it sort of just goes back and forth. And then once you have created that up here, and you've also given all your nice normal style elements in this regard, you just have to say that on this div element, that's where I want the animation to occur. So I tell it the name of my animation. Again, that's going to line up right here. I give it a duration, which means how long do you want it to take? If you set this to be this is 4 seconds. If you set this to be 1 second, your color change is going to go red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow, fade back, fade back, fade back. So I set it to 4 in here so that you can see the process of it unfolding, so to speak. And then you also have to tell it if you want it to keep going indefinitely. I like doing this because if you're going to all the trouble of making an animation, you know, you kind of might as well make it look interesting the whole time, not just it changes once and then if someone missed it, well, sorry, you don't see it do anything. And you can see all of that manifest in here in this that I have right up here. You can see it just switched itself back to black. It's just been going over and over. And then in mine, if I'm not mistaken, I have it set, I have a paragraph element with the class called color changing, which you can see right here. I have a font size, I set a border on it, I gave it some other things, and then I have my color change animation right here. I'm going from a background color of 6 zeros, which is black, and I'm going to a background color of the same as this middle purple color from my prior gradient. And I have an 8-second duration, so you'll see it's going much slower, but ultimately the background of this will match the background of this right here before it switches itself back to black and then begins that process. And again, I'm having it do that infinitely because it looks nice if it's continuing to go. So that's color changing. And again, this sort of structure, this value right here, you can change if you want to name it something different. If it's a color change animation, I would keep it called this because that's the easiest way to remember. And then you can customize the colors, but you don't need to worry about modifying anything else in here. You always want your from, you always want the to. And in this case, if what you're doing is changing the background color of something, you want to change that. If you wanted to use this exact same thing to change the font color of a div or a font color of a paragraph tag, then instead of background color, let's just say you would do color, which is what controls font. Yeah. And then once we have that invoked, so that's where we have that, you may have noticed that up at the top, my rocket emojis, black holes with Katie Bauman is moving side to side. That is another animation called slide. So in this case, again, we tell it that it's a keyframes. It is called slide. And I want it to go from margin left 50% to margin left 0%. Now what this means technically is I want it to roughly start with a margin to the left of my header of 50% of the page. So you'll see where it does its flip is about halfway across. And then it goes from there to a 0%. So it comes all the way over to the edge. And then because I have told it that I want it to repeat indefinitely, it can just go over and over and over again. So I have, I've styled that as well. So I've given it a font size, I've given it a color, 6 Fs, which is white. I've given it a font family, all that kind of stuff. And then again, I've given the animation name, which is slide, giving it a duration, 4 seconds, a good amount of time for it to move back and forth. And I've said, please continue. And again, you can customize this because depending on the size of what you're trying to, if you just had a bunch of rocket ships here that were only about this big, you might want to move that margin much further over than 50%. Start it over here so it gets a bigger swing back and forth. As always, these numbers and these kind of things are here for you to explore and see what happens when you change one of them. You can always come back and look at what it was and reset it, but that's a really good way to explore kind of what happens if you set this to some crazy number. And now, once you have mastered that, the other little addition to it to actually make it do what mine is doing, which is you can see it sort of looks like it's bouncing back and forth. If we implemented exactly what is up here, as I just explained, what it would do is it would start about halfway over from here, and it would slide itself like this, and then it would magically restart itself here and slide over again if I said that I wanted an infinite slide. However, we have this nice option which allows us to do all the same stuff. You're going to keep your HTML the exact same as the HTML in the slide in. You're going to keep your CSS and the keyframe slide the same as the slide in up here. The only thing you're going to change is in the CSS section where you're actually adding the animation to the paragraph element. You still want to have it as the name is slide. You still want to say the iteration count is infinite. You can change the duration if you wanted to. You also could leave this as 4, but this is the key that you have to add, which is the direction is alternate. So go to the left and then go to the right and then go to the left and then go to the right indefinitely, because again, you've said infinite. And so those 3 different things, an interesting gradient background, this color changing paragraph tag that has my bio data, my quick biographical information that I found on Katie, and then my title that swings back and forth just for a little bit of, it's sort of flying in on a rocket in and out. That goes a long way to making this a little more interesting to look at than if it was just a plain page that didn't have any movement or anything like that. This changing the color of its background a little bit draws your attention to it. So hopefully you read about Katie and all the things that she did and the technology they used to capture the black hole, which was continuous high resolution image reconstruction using patch priors, or CHIRP, which is a pretty good acronym for it. And that it was the Event Horizon Telescope team that captured the picture. So if you're looking for more information about it online to be able to learn more about what they did, hopefully that would draw your attention because of our nice little animation there. So now with the CSS well sorted and being able to come up with as many interesting ways as possible that you wanted to do that, you can create all different kinds of styles on the elements themselves, whether you use a div or a paragraph tag or anything else. Then in here, we now begin with our new HTML. So far, we've talked about text fields, we've talked about drop downs, all that kind of stuff. So now we have 2 new ones that we can introduce at the same time because they're both pretty straightforward. One is checkboxes and one is text areas. So checkboxes, if you want to give someone the ability to say yes or no, very easily. So if you are letting them play a game online and you want to say, check the box if you understand the rules, great. Or check the box if you love this movie, or check the box if you like this subject in school. It's really, really easy. No one has to click a drop down and look for a certain option or anything else. It's just check the box. So in my example in here, what I have done is create a checkbox with the ID, because again, we're going to talk to it in JavaScript, got to have an ID called I love Hermione. And then I also have a JavaScript function that I'm calling check, which to my own discredit is not as descriptive as I would like it to be, but it basically is a, since this this demo that I made is standalone, it doesn't have all the fields you guys have been working on and all the interesting things you've created. It's really just checking what they entered here. That's my whole goal that I'm going to have for this. So in that case, it's kind of aptly named, but still, I would prefer it be more descriptive. So I have everything that I have up there. I start the form. Again, this could be a form you already have, and you could just add this as another element underneath of it. So you have it's an input element, the same as a text field is. You say that the type is a checkbox. You give it the ID because we're going to talk to it in JavaScript. And then we give it a value that we set and say, if you check this box, what are you saying? Are you saying, so check this box if you love Hermione? If you check it, you're saying you do. If this was supposed to be check this box if you do not support something, then the value could be no. It doesn't actually matter in the context of what we're doing here, because all we're going to do is check if it's checked or not. But it's good to give this value in here because sometimes it will matter what that value is. So just for practice sake. So we have that. And then we also put a button in, which we're very familiar with. Obviously, at this point, we give it a value for what the button should say, and then we give it an on-click event. And in this case, our event is check. This will be a very simple function because, again, we've already talked a lot about the kind of things you can do once you're in the JavaScript world. So you could populate a paragraph element that you could put down below here that says, oh, wow, me too, if they have checked the box. Or if they haven't checked the box, you could say, you should learn more about Hermione. She's really awesome. So in this case, I have modified mine to be in theme because while I do think Katie could pass for a Hermione, honestly, I wanted to stick on exactly what she was well known for. So in that case, we're saying check the box if you think outer space is really cool. Check yes, or leave it blank for no. And then all we're doing in here, literally just to check if our checkbox works, is say if document dot get the element with the ID I love Hermione right here. And then the property on it that we want to look at is the property checked, which is asking, is that element with that ID checked? If this was not a checkbox, if this ID mapped to the button or mapped to something else, and I tried to ask this of it, it would give me an error and be telling me that, nope, there's no checked property on a text field because you can't check it. It's not a checkbox. So we're saying if the document with the ID I love Hermione is checked equals true. So if it is checked, then we're going to do an alert, which is a little pop-up window that says yay. And again, you'll recognize the if and the else from our select statement lesson. If they did not, so else, give them an alert pop-up that says boo, because Hermione is the best. And you can see right here, if you put this line in, the alert, then you're going to show a pop-up window that'll display whatever text you put in here between the double quotes, and there's an OK button to close it. It is useful for short messages like this. It's not great if you're trying to put a bunch of stuff out because, again, as soon as they click OK, it disappears. There's also some browsers that will block pop-ups, and in some cases, this is considered a pop-up, even though it's an alert. So it's not a good thing to rely on if you were building like a very lengthy website, but it's very nice for practice and stuff like this. If I was trying to get a check in the middle of my JavaScript function I already had, and I wanted to see if my checkbox was working, I can put this little part of that code inside of my other JavaScript function. And then if I check the box and click submit and I get a yay, then I know that the checkbox worked. If I get a boo, but I did have the checkbox checked, then okay, there's a problem. So you can see in here, if I check this box, I can show you my very basic in here. The only thing I changed is I named my checkbox ID space is cool because that's what I'm checking. So if that is checked and true and I click submit, it pops up and says, yay, I love space too. I can click OK and that's it. So it's not really, and if I didn't check it and I click submit, it says, good thing you live on Earth then. And then I also included for our final new HTML element, text areas. So this is very similar to a text field. It's treated very similar to a text field. The difference is It gives you a lot more space, potentially a whole lot more space. So you create the text area, you give it an ID, because again, we're going to talk to it from JavaScript. And then the way you specify its size is you give it both a number of rows and a number of columns. So you can think of a row as every time you could press enter. So mine has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, 5 possible rows of text. Columns, it's a little bit more interesting, but basically they approximate a rough amount for columns, and then you just do that over and over and over and over. Same kind of thing. It's not just spaces. That would be the 20 spaces or so that I believe I put this in as. And now I'm going to check because now I'm second guessing myself. Oh no, okay. So rows 5, columns 50. So I actually would say yes, it's 1 space bar for every column. So it's a really easy way to look and kind of approximate how large you want this. The other thing you can do with text areas that, you know, probably is more fun than it should be, is drag them all around. So you can make a big old mess, including making them go all the way back to some crazy size that's different. That's kind of the bane of the existence of someone that builds like a nice, carefully constructed page, and then someone gets to mess with it like that. But there are ways you can modify the element to prevent people from being able to change the size. That said, I don't do that because I think it's really fun to sit and make you go back and forth. So give it a try if you ever want to. So basically, once you've created the text area and you've given it an ID and you've given it a number of rows, a number of columns, and you're good, and you've given a button in there. Again, this could also be part of where the checkbox is, and beyond that, part of where all your other form stuff already exists. And if so, then inside of your check function or inside of your other function, whatever is called when the button click happens, we have this ability. So for a text area, there's a lot of things you could do, and hopefully you will use your imagination to think of some of the things you could do. But my favorite use case, or easiest use case to explain it, is to say, okay, you gave them this giant amount of text. You're probably not even going to just, like they answered a question, you know, put that in a Mad Lib style thing down below it. Because what if they wrote 10 lines and 100 columns worth of stuff? You're just going to put it down here in a sentence. I like blah, 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 too. That'll be a little bit confusing. But something like if you give them a leading question and you have them answer it, and then you get to check out of everything they wrote in there, did they include a certain word? So if you ask for their favorite fact about outer space, and what you want to see is, did they come up with a fact about black holes? Then you could let them enter everything in there. And when they click on the button and invoke the function in JavaScript, you take everything that's inside of the value of the element, the ID that you gave your text area, so in this case, all about me, you put that into a variable. And then what you do is you use this function in JavaScript that you can call on a string, which is what a value would be, basically just text from something, called includes, which is a check to say, does the variable giant text include this phrase? So mine could be, in this case, it's Hermione, but it could be black hole or just black, something like that. And in this case, my goal was to see if you get a section, or if you get a text area that says, tell me all about yourself. I'm checking, did you include the word Hermione? If so, I knew you loved her, definitely. If you didn't, then come on, what are you doing? However, you can see down here, we're saying that that's what that does. We're just doing a check to say, does the giant text include that? If it's true that it does include it, then do all of this kind of stuff. Should also point out, you'll notice right up here that we have if giant text dot includes Hermione, and then I just have double parens and close this, whereas down here, it's the same part all the way up to here. Will be the same up to here, but then we have equals true. In this case up here, the equals true is implied. So we're saying that if this, then you can come in and do this. So the checks are a little bit, this is a little bit more complete, but this works the same way. It's basically a shortcut for not having to type this part out. Now, if you wanted to check if it was false, meaning if it did not include a certain thing, so maybe you don't want them to include the word black holes or something like that, you do need the false there, but that's why the true is the default. If you're doing a check, their presumption is you're checking if something is true, because what else would you be doing to then let them into this next little step? However, what do we think might be wrong with checking in this way as described up here? So someone who does love Hermione still might not always write about her just because you've asked them about themselves. So it might be worth coming up with a question you could ask beforehand, a little bit of a prompt before the text area so that someone knows what you're trying to get them to do. So say, describe your favorite Harry Potter female hero, and then determine if they go for Ginny or Luna or somebody else, not Hermione. Then you can be like, all right, what are you doing here? I mean, this is my favorite. But then if they're more likely to include Hermione's name if you ask them for something that's a little bit more direct to it. So in my case, I did, what is your favorite fact about outer space? And I think something that would work really well down in here would be coming up with some part of space or something like that that you're hoping someone might have a fact about, and then you would do a check to see if they included that. If they didn't include mention of black holes, your pop-up could say, that's really cool. Could you also tell me something about black holes? Because you're trying to keep people on the theme of your of this site, let's say, something to that effect. Okay, so that's the end of what we have in here. It's a lot, and it seems very complicated at first, especially with the animations and the gradients and all that kind of stuff, but it's a lot of fun to play around with, and I'm hoping that the checkboxes and the text area is pretty straightforward and similar enough to other things we've done that you can find good ways to integrate it into the projects that for many of you we took a month off from working on so we could go explore HTML Canvas and games and things like that. So hopefully this is a nice way to re-enter yourself into your previous project code and make some cool rainbow art, make some neat things happen and neat things move around. And then also include a few new HTML checkboxes and text areas and other elements that can augment what you already have. So if you have any questions, as always, please send us an email, and I will look forward to seeing you starting on Tuesday, March 16th, so we can talk about Katie and some more interesting things about her, as well as come up with anything else that you wanted to share. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you later.